Hello everyone and a warm welcome to today's webinar. I advocate Nilesh Borate welcome you all on behalf of REDA Practitioners Association Pune Study Circle. Today we will be interacting with Honorable Justice Ambadas Joshi sir, retired, on the topic of drafting of deeds. Honorable Justice Ambadas Joshi sir has done his LLB from Marathwada University and he has passed with first class with distinction and he was a topper in the university. He started his practice from 1982. He was an assistant government pleader and additional public prosecutor in 1987 to 88 in High Court bench at Aurangabad. He was appointed special counsel for state of Maharashtra in many cases. He also represented plenty of private litigations in various laws. He also appeared on behalf of Reserve Bank of India and other leading banks. He also appeared for Pune University, Marathwada University, Mahatma Phule Agriculture University, and Government of Maharashtra. He was elevated to bench in Mumbai High Court in March 2004. He worked at Nagpur bench for 8 years. He also worked as visiting judge at Panji and Mumbai. He has presided over various benches. He has worked as a single judge. He has also participated as a junior judge in divisional bench. He has presided over as senior judge over the bench. He has also presided as senior judge on divisional bench. He was appointed as chairman of Maharashtra Administrative Tribunal in July 2014 and he got retired as the chairman Maharashtra Administrative Tribunal in 2019. At present, he is settled at Mumbai doing consultation, arbitration and occasionally practice in Supreme Court of India. We are really proud to have you over here, sir. A very warm welcome to you, sir. I now request Mr. Joshi, sir, to please take over.
Namaskar. It is a pleasure to join a gathering in the change situation in the form of a webinar. And it is another interesting thing to put in a humorous manner. You are all the lawyers of the class which is described as haves than the class of have-nots. And the class of lawyers that you are have a great and larger responsibility while you undertake the job of drafting. Friends, I propose to address by using both languages because I am told that, and of course I am also aware that many people keep on searching and surfing various lectures and we can't deny large masses from the benefit of whatever dialogue that takes place in such webinars because those are simultaneously flashed on public platforms also. So I would definitely elect to interact in both languages, that is Marathi as well as English, and if required, some questions come even in Hindi. Friends, drafting is such an interesting thing that there are no bounds as to the field in which you may be required to draft. Though the association is of those who are practicing in related law, mainly in building construction line, it may not be necessary that you would be required to draft only in relation to this law. Your clients are going to be either the builders, the contractors, the buyers of the flat, either those who are financiers and many like that. Once a lawyer is engaged for any purpose, the client would approach you for any type of drafting. Right now, I am not going to deal with the drafting of pleadings, and I shall restrict myself to the drafting of variety of deeds. Friends, I wish to approach to this question from the basic issue as to why you need documentation at all. See, the documents are, history of documentation is as old as period immemorable. Whenever people began entering into contract and they learned the formal language, it does not refer to any particular language. Something written on the document in any form, that becomes a document. Whenever it came for documentation, what is the need of documentation? Why you need to draft? Is it that all transactions in the life are done by initiating those through documents? Definitely not. We have all learned while learning the Contract Act, definition of an agreement enforceable at law, that is a contract. It never happens that a contract is entered barely as and when it is adduced in a written form. It is essentially initiated through some oral talk, some proposal in the some form. It could include a proposal in the written form also. So whenever a proposal in the written form is given, it becomes a document. And once accepted, it's a promise. Therefore, drafting of deeds, in fact, begins from the initiation of the proposal. Friends, you may recollect, those who do some practice in financial matters and company matters, do you remember what are the contents of prospectus of a company? Whenever financial results are declared, do you recollect that it essentially contains a statement that this publication does not amount to prospectus? Whenever a prospectus is given by the company, it tantamounts to an invitation to invest. So anything that you write for any purpose, that becomes a part and parcel of a formal document, whether titled as a deed or not. Friends, we may approach to this question from a different angle. Why a document is required? Can the thing not happen barely by oral documents, oral representations and conditions agreed and agreed upon? I am reminded of a Hindi proverb, which everybody knows. I am not putting you in the form of a question as to what it is. I'll repeat it and recite it. 10 बार बका एक बार लिखा. Whenever somebody pens down, writes down something and signs upon it, in the modern times, in the form of written in electronic media also, when somebody writes something, it becomes evidence of whatever has been stated without requiring its formal proof in an independent form. Of course, rules of proving a document would be attractive. Now we see the provisions of Evidence Act. You would definitely recollect what is the rule of primary evidence. Facts are proved by primary evidence. What is primary evidence? You know it. When an event has occurred, it is to be sensed by different sensory organs. It is by way of deposing before the court as to what has been said. However, whenever there exists a document, what is the law? Oral evidence is excluded by documentary evidence. Meaning thereby, as and when the transactions in human life in historic times did not remain barely oral, it became more complex and more complicated. Conversion of the terms of agreement, reducing them into writing with the finest precision, became the necessity, and hence the documentation became necessary. And once the documentation became necessary, the skill of drafting, use of apt and appropriate language, choice of exact words becomes eminently relevant. Therefore, once the complexity of life has cropped up and it is becoming more and more complex, documentation is playing a vital role. Therefore, more and more expertise is necessary. Now, what is that? In order to find out what are the imperative things which are required to be done by a lawyer, while the lawyer sits down for drafting, let us start to list them out. I know that I am talking to an elite community who are always involved in documentation. The question is, why do I tell all these things which are really known to you? See what happens, even when the people are expert, they are prone to commit mistakes. So you and me have to devise a method which would commonly be understood in different processes as SOP, standard operating process. So what shall be the standard operating process for any drafting? Let us devise it. It could be this way. Cultivate the habit of having a notebook or register where you write down the motto of the document that you wish to draft. What is that you wish to draft? Let us take a very simple document that we understand. You are going to draft a promissory note. Now you would say it is outdated, nobody does it now. But for the purpose of illustration, let us deal with this document. It has to be unconditional, promise to pay, on demand. Now, what is the analogy? Whenever you want to draft a document, you will to first find out what are the legal requirements of that document. If you put conditions, it comes out of that definition. Definition of promissory note. Therefore, you must first go to the law which governs the document. That is the first thing to be done. What are the mandatory requirements required for the purpose of constituting a particular document to fit into the particular object or definition? Once you lay hands on the document, read the provisions, list out the requirements, and that is a part of the SOP that I am indicating. Now, second portion I'll touch is whether the parties to contract are competent. What do you mean? Take a case where minor's interest is involved in the property. A lunatic's interest is involved in the property. Person of unsound mind is there. Person who is otherwise infirm, his interest is involved in the property. You will have to see as to whether the party to contract is in a position in law to give a free consent. It shall never suffice by putting a recital that parties are competent to contract. So ascertainment of the status of parties to be competent to contract has to be a part of SOP. Now, case of corporations or legal entities. Suppose there is a transaction of some legal entity which is in the form of a public trust or a waqf. How do I deal with? If it is a public trust property, you need a prior permission. If the conveyance is to be for a period, it is a conveyance or a lease for a duration more than 3 years, and many such conditions. Whether the permission is there, permission has been properly taken, whether there should be recital as to permission. If it is a statutory body, who is the competent authority to enter into contract, whether there is a notification, whether a proper authorization in favor of the person who is going to sign the document is there. All these things have to be seen. Without that, the competence to enter into contract is not complete. So this is going to be a part of that SOP. Now, as far as the next question we will consider, we are going by bare Indian Contract Act, nothing new. Parties must be competent to contract, then consideration must be legal. Now, since you practice in the building related laws, what happens if some builder includes the rescue areas or rescue premises areas into the property to be sold? Proper margins are not left. FSI is used more than what it could be. Could it be valid and legal consideration? Definitely not. Therefore, the consideration in the contract, whether it is valid, legal, proper, duly agreed upon, could be the part of the SOP. And those must find proper place in the contract. Now, description of property. This is a sort of ministerial thing that I am telling you. What I initially told you as a part of SOP was to ascertain as to existence of competence to contract and conditions, lateral, collateral, incidental, or essential ingredients of competence. Now I am coming to formal recital and narration. This narration or description part could appear to be ministerial action. Company का नाम ठीक से लिखो, write down full details. What happens if you don't write age? So to say, nothing serious, but identification of an individual by writing his full and proper address, age, etc. is imperative. Recently, I came across a news item while I was observing some note on the dictionary.com site that how do you describe a woman? Should you essentially write Mrs., Srimati, Miss, MS, or something like that? Or you describe her by a gender? In a suit, when a summons is issued and the name does not signify identification whether it is a man or woman, of what age he is, what is his address, you know the plight of the service of summons. Summons is simply returned. Address is not properly defined, party is not properly defined. So in conveyance also, according to me, as per my experience in my life, narrating the description to fullest possible extent is imperative. This aspect is not taken very seriously. I must mention incidentally that one of the honorable judges of Bombay High Court passed an order that these description, Mr., Mrs. so-and-so, should not be done. But in my humble view, this is not exactly in keeping with the requirement in practical life. So also the civil manual or practitioner's manual. Therefore, proper description of parties in the document is unescapable. This has to be a part of the SOP. Now coming to the recital, description of property. I remember to have lost a suit in my young age as a lawyer. How was the property described in the suit? 3 mango trees on the east. Mango trees are not postulate. By the time the suit came for hearing, mango trees were cut off. A valley on the left, or something like that. And if this description was there in the suit, why it had appeared like that? It had appeared in the suit or in the plaint because it appeared in the sale deed in that fashion. Identification of property with utmost unambiguous terms has to be done. If you write a 7-feet road on east side, you must write 7-feet road as shown in the development plan as on so and so date, or you have a date, it is notification, because 7-feet road may be 12 feet later on, and it could be a sort of acquisition from the same plot of which you are going to enter into a deed. So description of the property with utmost care and caution is imperative. Take a case where the plot is of a regular size, square, rectangle, equilateral triangle, or of some size, and you simply say write hexagonal plot or rectangular plot. Do not write the dimensions, or write the dimensions and there is a typographical error. What will happen? You have to have the knowledge as to how are the lands measured. You have a plot of irregular size. I'll tell you a very funny experience which I had in my life. I know the colony also, there is a colony at Aurangabad. When I saw the layout, in the layout, all plots are of parallelogram size. And if you enter in the society and find out, you do not find any plot of parallelogram size shape. They are all rectangular. And the question of title came into issue of encroachments cropped up, because one intelligent man got converted his plot honestly to the area, but not honestly to the shape. Therefore, description of the property, utmost faithful to the revenue record, is a part and parcel of SOP. Please bear in mind, no compromise on that. In my life, I have seen that, I have experienced, I have insisted on my clients to have a joint measurement plan or map available in city survey or property record. And you find it is having irregular size. You just can't describe them properly. Therefore, you put additional description, land survey number so and so, renumbered as block number so and so, earlier owned by so and so, in whatever manner that you can explicitly add. So description of property with least or zero ambiguity is of no escape. Now a relevant question comes here is what happens to the title verification? Now you'll ask me a question, or somebody may raise a question in mind when you are talking of documents. What is the question of title verification? In absence of title verification, it would not be possible for you to arrive at a proper description. Friends, I know I used to be bank's lawyer, and one property came to me for opinion. And after studying the entire title documents, I had reached a conclusion that the owner who was possessing the property and wanted it to be mortgaged to the bank positively had ownership rights in the property. Rights were traceable to best possible history. But there was a hitch that a particular parcel of the property was not identifiable in a very big chunk. If there have been numerous sale deeds, property has transferred 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 hands. And every time there has been improper description of the property. How do you arrive at exact conclusion as to which is that property that is being bought or alienated or encumbered or subject matter of the particular document? Therefore, due and appropriate title investigation being done properly is imperative, is of no choice. Barely relying on a principle which we call caveat emptor or buyer beware. You know, there is another converse principle to that. No one can pass a better title than what one has. So caveat emptor and this principle go hand in glove, hand in hand. Therefore, proper and due and fullest investigation of title is an optionless covenant. Bare recital in the document, which is the standard practice that I have seen in many documents, that the buyer has investigated and satisfied himself as to the vendor's absolute right, title and interest in the property. This recital will not cope up or vest in the vendor the absoluteness of rights which he ought to have, because what he never has, what he never had, would never have been transferred by him. For all purposes, this will result in failure of transfer of consideration. Because, as you know, what is the definition of consideration? I have been insisting to all my colleagues, friends, and law students that you must have not just by heart the provisions of Indian Contract Act. You have to have those imbibed into your heart, blood, and brain. When does the consideration pass as far as the person who is giving out something, when whatever he is giving out goes out? Because that is the consideration for the buyer. He gets an absolute unaffected property rights in whatever parcel which he buys by given description. A flat is sold, as you commonly know in your field, that square feet area. Somebody wisely writes carpet area, somebody says built up area, or different methods. As it is a common joke in the field that if you have bought 1,000 square feet from your builder, and if you sit down for counting, probably you hardly get that area which is really described. So a covenant or recital in the document which does not match with actual title, mind it, it really does not pass on the due title and it will attract numerous complications. These are the general principles. Then signing, witnesses and all that, you have to see every time all that is done. Another interesting thing which is very much imperative, and without sharing these two things, my dialogue with you will not be complete. Namely, please keep it in mind that whatever is agreed is duly depicted in the contract. Never write something which was never agreed upon between the parties with a presumption that it is an imperative condition. I remember few of my friends, lawyers, used to ridicule at me when I used to share the documents with the clients, telling them that you have to sign this document, you are parting with your property, you are parting with your money, and you must read and understand every covenant content in the document. They used to say, why the client has come to you? You write down anything and that he is going to sign on that. That never happens. That is not all right. I stretch it where I'll tell you. I stretch it to the level where the witness is standing in the witness box. And then he says, I don't know what is written in the document. It was scribed by the lawyer. I don't know. He's saying that due to my age, I don't remember, it's all right. There would be solutions for that. Refreshing the memory of witness. He could say that I have commissioned, I have appointed a lawyer, and now he was supposed to take care of everything. But training of a witness, I don't support tutoring of witness. Training of a witness of speaking truth of as to whatever has been agreed begins from the date when the document has been drafted. And drafting of document is imperative. In the process of drafting of document, it is imperative that the client must be involved in the process. You must have heard it that in different states, whenever the lending takes place from the institutions like banks, the documents never come like blank formats and parties sign it. There are discussions and conferences. Nowadays, there are negotiations on interest. Negotiations on the different clauses of contingencies. Therefore, involvement of the litigants in the process of drafting is imperative. Whenever it comes to certain statutory formats, like under RERA, you can tell the client, this clause is imperative under the contract, in the contract as per the law. These are the contracts, these are the conditions which we are introducing in addition without being derogatory to whatever are the statutory conditions. Therefore, sharing of the documents with the client and their agreeing upon is imperative. Second thing, as I already mentioned, at the cost of repetition, I shall say that whatever has been agreed must be faithfully reflected in the documents. Absolutely no option. Third thing which I have experienced in my life, and I must share it with you, and I am doing it. It is the duty of lawyer to visualize impediments in implementation. See, many times clients are far experienced and smart. They know whatever are the professional difficulties they encounter, but they never visualize that it must be incorporated in the documents. So you have to have a meeting with the client, discuss with them what are the practical difficulties. At times, it may involve your visiting site and understand it. If it is a contract of sale of machine and a question of installation comes, supplying of a manual comes. I remember to have handled a case in consumer law where the EEG machine was sold. You must have heard what is the electromagnetic graphing of the brain is done. That the machine is called the EEG machine. And when the EEG machine was sold, a proper manual and decoding documentation was not sold, was not provided. And the machine used to depict a graph which was deviating from the standard documentation, standard textbooks. And a sane man could be depicted as an insane, and an insane could be depicted as a sane person, as per the settled norms. So, whatever are the operating procedures of the machine given, supplied, becomes a part of the agreement to be entered into between the parties. Some novel thing is to be sold. Let us take example. Nowadays, India has bought a huge high-tech aircraft. What happens? Aircrafts are sold and the operating process is not provided. Training manuals are not given. Training is not important. Effect will be that the goods sold are sold with incoherent and incomplete knowledge and information, rendering the sale incapable of its enjoyment. Therefore, whenever some new transaction is being done, I remember you deal with the properties, therefore I'll give you an example. The builder had included a covenant in the contract that the structure is devised in such fashion that it would sustain seismic shocks. And an independent covenant was put as to the load to be put on the building, without making the buyers aware that a water tank load beyond certain load could not be put in. Everybody thought that a seismic sustainable design would mean a very strong design. It was in fact otherwise. The design was flexible, which would sustain certain amount of seismic shock and a flex. It turned out to be a condition which ought to have been interpreted. It becomes like this. You know, the laundryman writes on it that if the cloth is burned during the ironing, I am not responsible. Then he further says, if the color is fade, I am not responsible. Wonderful. He further says that if it is lost, I am not responsible. Whether all such conditions which are put in such fashion that which could never have been put in absence of actual agreement, those could never be valid. So narrating all such things in the documents are imperative. So the point that I tried to convey to you was, whenever certain covenants are to be devised by visualizing the difficulties, a common conference, common visualization, imagination, study of similar contract, inclusion of novelties between the parties by appropriate dialogue is imperative. Now question comes as to the vis majeure or force majeure clauses. These clauses are such that whether you write or not, act of God, doesn't matter if you don't write. But what happens if you write? If you write that I am not responsible for act of God, fine. But will it not frustrate? If a contract frustrate or is breached, what shall be the consequences could be provided by the contract, and it is always prudent to have such clauses properly deliberated. One you people must remember, every lawyer must remember, that is again back to Indian Contract Act, as to what happens when consequences of damages of a contract, consequences in the event of damages, in the event of breach or extent of damages is proved. What will happen? You know what law says? Law says that whenever a contract provides for consequences of breach of contract, it shall be the discretion of court to grant anything within the limit provided by the contract. So therefore, you should be quite conscious and live that anything that you agree should not be such that it will be unworkable. And last point, and I will then offer myself for any questions that could be asked, is never have an hidden agenda. I shall share you one of my experiences. One of my stenographers once came to me when I was a lawyer, and he brought a draft before and placed it before me. Sir, I want your approval. After reading it, I told him that, gentleman, I see a hidden agenda in this. He confessed that yes, it is there. So says, I am not going to help you. Lawyer working for either party should, as a professional ethics, as an ethics of life, rule of morality, should never have an hidden agenda. A contract is always to be entered for a betterment of both the parties. You may visualize, you may negotiate. Best of the negotiation is the skill of the party. You know what people call our Prime Minister in relation to his international relations? He's the best negotiator. He knows what is the interest of India. Therefore, as a negotiator, let your client have best of the skills, but let there never be a hidden agenda. every contract has to be entered with that value of life, that both parties have to remain in win-win position. And if this ethics of contract is followed, it becomes a benevolentness that is required, and litigation is never the ultimate policy. Why people come to lawyer for drafting? Not with a hidden agenda of winning when the matter goes to court, but with a guarantee that the contract gets performed and parties remain in win-win position. That is the role of a lawyer. Last point, though I said my earlier point was last. What happens if both parties engage a single lawyer and say that we want agreement to be drafted? That is the credit of a lawyer, that both parties trust upon him. All right, ideal, whatever I have told tries to fit into that. When both parties have different lawyers, what do? They would essentially sit independently with their own client, examine each and every condition to be incorporated, mandatorily required to be incorporated, and optionally added in the contract within the permissible limits. Well and good. Then you have a joint conference and have an honest exchange of thoughts, and then finalize the draft. I think whatever I wanted to emphasize as a general principle, I know I am talking to a very elite audience, and I really do not mean to educate you, but I mean to caution you as to pitfalls in the process of drafting. And if there are some questions, the comparer would or moderator would definitely be free to ask.
Thank you, sir, for a very informative and educative lecture conducted today. Now we shall move to the second stage of our lecture today. That is a question-answer session. I have a question, sir, for you from Advocate Sagar Adhab. The question is, if multiple transactions in respect of a particular property took place in past, then how many previous original title deeds a purchaser is supposed to get from his vendor?
Okay, very interesting question. See, as a lawyer, I'll tell you what was my experience. I have seen different organizations doing the title search. I can name them because I am telling a good thing and no question of any organization being blamed. I have seen Maharashtra State Financial Corporation tracing the title to 35 years. This information I am telling you, which dates back to 1975 and which lasted till MSFC was very effective. Various banks have practice of searching 12 years. In my humble view, when the preservation of documents has become very easy, and Evidence Act says presumption of 30 years old document, right? So MSFC was right in tracing up to 30 years, 35 years. Because there is a presumption for document which is dating back prior to that. But every possible trace has to be done. Non-available, not available, yes, it's okay. I'll tell you the example. I'll take Hyderabad, Vidarbha and Bombay, 3 areas especially. Since I originally come from Marathwada and I have seen how the revenue laws have evolved, I'll share you with that. Nizam area did not have very nice revenue documents. They used to have only document which used to be called initially Wasul Baki. That is only revenue record. That's all. What revenue has been recovered and what revenue is yet to be recovered. That was the original document available in Nizam area. Then came Lavani Patra. Then came Pahani Patra. Then came Khasra. And then Maharashtra Land Revenue Code. So whatever are the documents available for maintenance of record and rights, every such oldest document must be traced. Because ultimately, anybody can crop up. See, what is the limitation? You have to keep it in mind, law of limitation. What is the age of minority? 18 years. Child born after the death of the father. So something more. Okay. Why not investigate up to 18 years or 21 years? Then lunacy. Somebody has gone missing 7 years. Fine. Lunacy. Somebody gets back into the normalcy after 30 years. 40 years, 50 years. So every traceable transaction must be traced. What is the concept of due diligence? Let us go to that. Buyer has to be diligent. concept of diligence does not define it, lets it open-ended. It is open-ended. Nowadays, since I take it for myself, I started practice in 77, 76. So I know what documents were in existence and available at that time. So I must trace it back to every possible level. See the fun. I know a couple of tahsils where record was burnt, tahsil was burnt. So every time a document used to come, that no document is available because tahsil is burnt. As a lawyer, you must know, all right, tahsil was burnt. What about Director of Land Records? What about oldest survey documents? Every such document has to be traced. And multiple transactions, each title must be traced. See, when I have seen it, boundaries do not match in different cell deeds. You have to go sketch by sketch, and find out an unconquerable area, a concurrent area, indelible area, which is, there is no controversy about that. Therefore, I know Sagar Awad deals with these matters. A best possible trace has to be done. No excuse. Limitation of years is an imprudent limitation, particularly now. Had I been doing this task in 1970, my limitation was 12, 13, 40 years, fine. But in 2020, I would take it back to 50 years. Why not 50 years? The longevity of life has gone up. Preservation, quality of preservation document has gone up. I think I have reasonably answered the question.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Paithankar. It says, in case of dispute between parties, what is the responsibility of an advocate drafting the document?
As I have mentioned to you, the ethics of draftsman. Absolutely no responsibility. This is one. Secondly, unless he is liable for negligence, it could be sort of a professional misconduct, and in addition, liability under consumer law, liability under bar related law also, misconduct in profession. If he just forgets to write proper names, omits to, in spite of providing the information, he does not write exact vendor's name. He deliberately conceals vendor's name. Liability is only against misconduct or omission or negligence, and not for any lapse for which his responsibility can in no manner be attracted. But if I have seen nowadays, banks are taking an affidavit from the lawyer. I know why, because I have been bank's lawyer many times. I know a bank officer came to me for title search. He said, sir, I don't want anything. I just want your certificate. Bank is going to accept. I said, how can it happen? Why bank trusts a lawyer? That is a part of due diligence of the bank when they are lending. It is a due diligence of the buyer. You give a public notice. Not in one newspaper, you spend for 2 newspapers. You go and visit. I remember there was a court bird who had a lot of knowledge about the property. So somebody wanted to buy the property. And he came to me. I said, I will take 6 months for title search. He said, no, sir, transaction has to be done early. I told him to go to that court bird and find out whether there is a litigation about this property. The client wanted to take that risk. Lawyer is not responsible. But lawyer, I have seen this a practice unwelcome. Lawyers go to registrar's office, pay the search fees, and do not undertake the search. Lawyer is definitely responsible. But list pendants. There is a notice of list pendants. The plant has been registered and the lawyer has not seen it. Lawyer is undoubtedly responsible. Therefore, unless negligence can be attributed to the lawyer, an action against the lawyer may not be possible and permissible. But if negligence could be attributed, yes, law of tort, law of contract, consumer law, every law will come in picture against. Yes, you can ask question. I just put a curtain right because there is a sun ray coming on my face.
Sure, sir.
Yes, please continue.
So the next question is from Advocate Nilesh Garde. He asks whether mentioning survey number and referring to annexed map can be treated as adequate description of property?
No, I want you all attention to be drawn to Order 6 of CPC. I have, as I mentioned to the contract, I wish to emphasis on reading CPC for a draftsman also. How is the property to be described? You know, Order 7, Rule 11. No cause of action. No, property is not properly described. You lose in the suit. Here you will lose in the property itself. There could be error in survey number. See, what happens if the property has been subjected to consolidation of holdings? Now it is a historic subject, but still it is there. You know, there is a law relating to consolidation of holdings and prevention of fragmentation. When the consolidation officer consolidates the property, he prepares a comparative charge statement. It is called consolidation statement. Their old survey number is written. If there is no change, he writes Kayam, no change. If there is a change, he writes that A, B, C survey numbers have been clubbed together and gut number 10 has been given, allotted to that. Block number so and so has been allotted. If there is something like this, you have to write present block number so and so, measuring area so and so, which formerly were survey number so and so, individually measuring so and so. There has been reduction or increase in the area. New borders and boundaries are as follows, as given in the consolidation map. A fullest description of the minutest details of the property is imperative. Otherwise, the buyer gets a parcel which is undescribed. Like a water flowing on the floor, you never know which side is the slope it is going. You never buy such a loose property, you buy a defined parcel. Therefore, writing fullest possible description, where survey number is never adequate, every possible description has to be added. Yes.
Thank you, sir. The next question from Advocate Keval Ramani. What factors should be taken into consideration while drafting the arbitration clause in a deed?
Wonderful. See what happens. It shall suffice to say that all disputes shall be arbitrable. One. Ideally, if you could name an arbitrator, well and good. Or mode and form of arbitrator, still good. But in drafting, it is always said that keeping it fairly loose. What is the word I have used? Keeping it fairly loose is always welcome. All disputes arising between the parties shall be resolved by arbitration is such a laconic smallest clause could also be sufficient. Unless parties have a pre-decided choice, it happens in life. In villages, there is somebody who is a godly person, God-fearing person, known for his reputation. They could name him as an arbitrator. This can happen. I remember in one of my lectures in Pune Bar, I had told, I will quote the same thing here. There is an old saying, I'll quote it as it is in vernacular. विद्वानांमध्ये वाद होतात, चर्चा होते, पैलवानांमध्ये मैत्री होते आणि सधनांमध्ये विवाह होतात. अशी एक महाभारतापासून चालत आलेली प्रॉवर्ब आहे. आर्बिट्रेटर कसा पाहिजे? व्हॉट शुड बी द टाइप ऑफ आर्बिट्रेटर हु इज अ मॅन ऑफ प्रेस्टीज and prestige of such quality that both parties would have in mind a belief to honor his word. So if you could have an arbitrator of such height, well and good. But as I have seen in my life, people have many times a hidden agenda. Because in arbitrations, I have seen arbitrations are run like a suit, which they are not expected to be. So I would welcome arbitration clause with ambiguity, but I would welcome it more if they could agree upon a very so great figure as an arbitrator, that they really bow down before him and would feel honored in respecting his word. That is what is I believe. Yes.
The next question is from Advocate Surbi Mehta. Advocate Surbi, do you want to read out the question? So her question is, in case of development agreement, it has been always written that 40% of the owner and 60% of the promoter was. What is the best practice to write percentage of sharing or to write how flats or revenue is to be shared? Kindly guide us. That's her question.
Okay. See, what happens? This percentage it generates a process of calculation, right?
Yeah, yes, sir.
So this clause should accompany a clause of rendering accounts, periodic rendering of accounts. I'll tell you why I believe in this type of process. What happens? Life is a mysterious thing. You never know what is going to happen tomorrow. I have seen in my life that a man who has been honest all throughout, never made a wrong or false statement, never cheated anybody, but misfortune goes against him and he turns a pauper. And then he starts searching excuses for escaping from his liability. So phased payments and periodical accounting is the best practice. Delaying the things essentially creates a problem. Another interesting thing which all lawyers in this field would know, in the building line, as I have learned in my life, speed is the profit, delay is pauper. Therefore, parties have to bear in mind that come what may, the project has to go faster. Therefore, periodic rendering of account must accompany a clause of sharing. Ultimately, why parties agree particular ratio of sharing, location of site, type of construction, neighborhood, the sellability. You build huge flats and there are no buyers. You build small flats and they are sold like hotcakes. There are numerous factors. So there has to be a counseling beforehand. People save on consultation. People save on supervision charges. Parties should be promoted to consult a financial advisor. You know the rule of stitch in time saves the nine. It is always welcome to direct parties to retain a financial consultant who will give them impartial advice, bring them to a practical conclusion. Because I have been always telling the parties that it doesn't matter if you agree for a small amount, comparatively lesser profit. But what is important is the ethical part of it, that one who gives also has a joy of giving. I am crossing the limit of the legal part of it, but then practical aspect, living is more important than barely drawing a document. I remember to have gone to a builder to have an agreement for one of my relatives. Builder told me that, all right, you ask me anything, I'll write down anything. Because ultimately, honoring the agreement is my honesty. That was true. Therefore, there is no point in insisting on typical type of terms, but insisting on ensuring that there is a real sense and that ethics of following. Yes.
The next, I do not have the name of the person, the participant, but he says, please elaborate on the present situation. Can it be treated force measure, although not specifically mentioned in the agreement? And the second question he has, he's asked two questions. The second question is, can we say that a JV or a joint venture is a partnership?
Yes, good. There are two independent questions. I'll deal. First is quite simple. It could be answered in just one sentence. Present situation is that of force majeure, undoubtedly. None would venture to dispute it. Now there is an authoritative sanction. RBI has come with a deferment of loans, moratorium. So there is a matter of which judicial notice would be taken by the courts, even that it's a situation of force majeure. I think I have answered. Now coming to joint venture. Answer has to be in affirmative. Call by any name. It's an enterprise done by two companies or individuals where they agree to execute the work and share the profit. So it must attract provisions of law. That is my humble view.
Thank you, sir.
Small suggestion, incidental to this, there was a subject which used to be taught in BCom studies and mostly in MBA studies also, which lawyers dealing with the properties must study. It used to be titled as BO, business organizations. Lawyers must study for general knowledge business organizations. I would suggest a webinar on this by some professor in commerce or economics or any business management expert. That has to be studied. Please go ahead.
Oh, sir, that is noted. The next question is from Advocate Prachi Adgaonkar. She asks, nowadays landowner also equally responsible under RERA, but sometimes he is also cheated by builder. So there are any way to protect him? Is there a way to protect him? That's what she wants to ask.
I'll share you my experience instead of in form of a reply. One of my clients, when I was a lawyer, wanted to deal with his property by giving it to builder. Question was of securing the liability. Okay, I had suggested him to have bank guarantee for payments. Whatever monies he said, I told him to reduce the price or his profit share by some percentage. Suppose the builder was required to secure bank guarantee by paying a bank guarantee fee of 1%, for example, whatever is the percentage. I told him that you may tell him that this amount can be reduced from his profit share, but he would not like to go for money to the developer. I want money myself. Similarly, he could insure. आपण insurance premium दो की नहीं. तसं आपण म्हणायचं की I will pay an indemnity fees, but I want an indemnity of my liability. I want an indemnity against such liability in the form of a bank guarantee. I want my liability to be insured. Now doctors have their insurance, lawyer can have their insurance. So a property owner can have his insurance. Now question is who will insure? The developer will insure. He will give an indemnity bond supported by a bank guarantee. It is good that people have started thinking like this, because I know some property owner was prosecuted for negligence of the builder. Builder did some deficiency in the construction. Building collapsed. Architect and property owner were prosecuted. Therefore, there could be liability. It could be avoided. It could be ensured by proper drafting. I would welcome lawyers to apply mind to it and incorporate an indemnity clause, which is ordinarily there, but it is vague. Why can't make it specific in view of the fears those have cropped up? I think I have touched the answer. I don't know whether satisfactorily replied.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Loya, Mr. Abhijit Loya. He says, in today's scenario, most business agreements between the parties are executed, containing many legal obligations. Shall all such agreements be registered?
Yes, quite simple reply. If it results in conveying an interest in immovable property, it must be registered. If it does not result in conveying any interest in immovable property, it need not be registered. Yet, whatever is the due and adequate stamp duty must be paid.
The last question, sir, for today, it's the participant says, can an allottee cancel the registered agreement post-COVID due to unavoidable situation? Can builder refuse such cancellation?
Cancellation, every agreement can be rescinded, subject to liabilities. Can be rescinded subject to liabilities. He says, my all finances have gone down. I can't follow my commitment. So I don't want to buy this property, which is very much likely. Builder cannot say no, because how is he going to do it? Unless he gets money, he can't convey the property. So there can't be enforcement of a contract of this nature against the buyer. He can always sue for damages, but not for enforcement of a contract. There is another side where there is no question, but I think it must be replied. Whether the property owner can sue for enforcement. Answer could be dual. Yes, if the contract has been partly performed. These are the only contracts, though of personal nature. There could be an effort to enforcement without a guarantee of enforcement being done. Because here also, alternate remedy of damages is available. A very complex situation, complex question, intelligently asked.
Thank you, sir. The next question, I thought this is the last question, sir, but I have a lot of questions pouring because of the questions, the answers that you are giving in. He says it's Mr. Nitin Raja Bhosle, Advocate Bhosle. Sir, RERA bars filing before civil court, but MOPA has to go to criminal court. So is it permitted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, surely, yes.
And the next question, sir, it's from Advocate Bansode. So please elaborate whether the decrees or orders sent to registrar under Section 89A of the Registration Maharashtra Amendment Act be mentioned in the deed.
Please repeat.
He says whether the decree or order sent to registrar under Section 89A of the Registration Maharashtra Amendment Act be mentioned in the deed.
Yes, if it is it becomes a source of title. It must be mentioned. Without that, the title is not complete. So must be mentioned.
Thank you so much, sir. This is the end of the question and answer session, and I would request our very active member of the RERA group, Advocate Amit Patil, to take over.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I would like to express our profound gratitude to our special guest, respected Amada Joshi sir, and all participants herein. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on today's webinar. I, on behalf of RERA Practitioners Association Pune Study Circle, under the guidance of our president, headed by Mr. Nilesh Borate, and our committee members, especially Rita Tanna madam, on behalf of her for considering her request to have a webinar with us, extend of thanks to respected Amada Joshi sir, who have blessed us with his presence and took out valuable time to his busy schedule and give us a very informative and valuable sessions on today's topic. Sir, we are really enlightening your knowledge and presence. I am also happy to express my vote of thanks to all participants who have actively participated on today's webinar. Lastly, special thanks to our entire committee team as well as our president, headed by Advocate Nilesh Borate, who have organized such a wonderful webinar and made this webinar have a grand success. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Namaskar.
Thank you, sir.
everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, everybody.